Imagine a king who forces a nobleman to kill his own son. This is not a legend, but an episode from the life of Cambyses, the son of Cyrus the Great. Do you think you know the history of Persia? Then listen. Cyrus the Great was a king who was called the father of the empire. He conquered with his sword, but ruled his empire with laws that even his enemies admired. His rule was seen not as tyranny, but as the beginning of greatness. His son Cambyses ascended to the throne. The people expected the golden age to continue. But it quickly became clear that instead of his father's wisdom, he brought anger and suspicion. And very soon it became clear that his first blow fell not on the enemies of the empire, but on those who were closest to him. What does a king who is afraid of even his own shadow do? He begins to look for enemies among those closest to him. Cambyses had a brother, Smerdis. He was younger, but beloved by the Persians. They loved him for his gentle nature and openness. He had no ambition to challenge the throne, but that was precisely what made him dangerous in the sick imagination of his older brother. Herodotus wrote, "First, Cambyses sent Smerdis to distant lands, far from the court. And then, a secret order. His brother was killed quietly, without trial or sentence. His death was hidden, like a dirty stain on the king's reputation." This was the first blow to the Achaemenid dynasty. Along with his brother, Cambyses killed the trust in himself. Irony of fate, it was this crime that opened the door to future chaos. After all, when he himself was gone, an impostor would appear, pretending to be Smerdis, and raising an entire empire against the court. But at that moment, Cambyses felt only relief. He had gotten rid of the specter of a rival. It seemed to him that now power belonged to him alone. In reality, this was only the first crack, and his steps became even darker. Home should be a place of warmth and protection. But what if even there, fear reigns? But for Cambyses, even his family became a source of fear. He broke a taboo that no Persian king before him had ever broken: he married his own sisters. For the Persians, this was sacrilege, a spit in the face of the laws of their ancestors. The son of Cyrus the Great trampled on the traditions he was supposed to preserve. But the worst was yet to come. One of his wives, his sister, dared to reproach the king. She reminded him that he had killed his brother Smerdis and trampled on the laws of the dynasty. And that was her death sentence. Cambyses could not tolerate even a hint of resistance, especially from those closest to him. Thus, the family, which was supposed to be a symbol of unity, turned into a place of horror. Everyone in the palace understood that if the king was capable of killing his brother and his own wife, then no one could feel safe. From that moment on, Cambyses finally turned into a tyrant. For him, power meant not protection, but the right to destroy. And then his rage was to go beyond the family, and strike the nobles and the common people. Cambyses was no longer satisfied with fear in his own home. Now he decided to test his cruelty publicly, on those who had served him for years. The most terrifying episode is connected with the nobleman Prexas. The king ordered him to prove his loyalty, by killing his own son. And not just anywhere, but in front of the entire court. The father stands before the court, drawing his bow, while the king coldly awaits the result. The arrow strikes the young man's heart. Instead of sympathy, Cambyses laughs and praises the accuracy. Herodotus called this the most terrible order of the king. This was no longer a reign. It was spectacular humiliation. Everyone who saw this scene understood, before them was not a king, but a sadist who enjoyed the grief of others. And this was not an isolated case. Cambyses punished military commanders for the slightest offense and executed his subjects publicly and demonstratively. His court increasingly resembled a torture chamber rather than a royal hall. Even Persian chroniclers, who usually embellished the images of rulers, could not hide this madness. His actions were so disgusting that they preferred to remain silent about them. But the worst was yet to come. In conquered Egypt, Cambyses decided to humiliate not only the people, he challenged the gods themselves. The conquest of Egypt could have been the pinnacle of Cambyses' glory. Before him lay a land with 1,000-year-old culture, temples, and gods worshipped by generations. Any wise ruler would have used this to strengthen his power and gain the respect of his subjects. But Cambyses chose something else: humiliation. The most sacred symbol for the Egyptians was the Apis bull. It was not just a sacred creature, but the embodiment of a deity. When a new Apis appeared in Memphis, the whole city celebrated. For the Egyptians, it was a sign of heavenly blessing. And that's when Cambyses entered the temple. Instead of honoring the bull, he ordered it to be brought to him and slaughtered it with his own hands. They say he laughed when the body of the sacred animal fell before the priests. But it didn't stop there. Herodotus wrote that Cambyses mocked the very rituals of the Egyptians, calling the priests frauds and mocking their faith. He also ordered the ancient tombs of the pharaohs to be opened, a spit in the memory of their ancestors, which seemed to the Egyptians worse than war. What does a ruler do when he calls the gods swindlers? It was not just an act of blasphemy, it was a blow to the heart of their world. The priests wept, the warriors stood stunned, the crowd froze in horror. Ancient sources may have exaggerated. But even if half of it was true, for the Egyptians it was a disgrace they never forgot. After that, Cambyses no longer seemed like a formidable conqueror. He became a blasphemer who was hated and feared. But he did not stop there. New campaigns awaited him, marches into utter madness. The victory over Egypt could have been the pinnacle of Cambyses' power. But it was not enough for him. His new whim was to conquer Ethiopia. On the map, it looked grandiose. In reality, it was suicide. Cambyses led his army deep into the African deserts without supplies or preparation, only by the will of the king. The sun was scorching, and soldiers were falling from exhaustion. Herodotus wrote that desperate soldiers cast lots to eat their own comrades. Even if this is an exaggeration, the very mention of it shows how terrible this campaign was. For the army, it was not just a defeat. It looked like a curse from the gods. The warriors remembered, the king had killed his brother, his wife, and the sacred bull. And now he was leading them into the desert, to their deaths. Cambyses did not admit defeat. He simply turned the remnants of his army around as if nothing had happened. But everyone saw that before them was no longer a conqueror, but a madman who was destroying his own people. His reign was rolling toward a fatal end. And even death decided to laugh at him. The deaths of great kings are usually shrouded in legend. They are mourned, tombs are built for them, and their names are passed down from generation to generation. But Cambyses' death was different, accidental, humiliating, almost mocking. During a campaign, he tried to mount his horse. And just then, his own sword, carelessly attached to his thigh, stabbed him in the body. It was not a battle or a conspiracy. It was an accident, a mockery of fate. The wound proved fatal. Cambyses suffered for a long time without receiving any help. Thus died the king who killed others with his sword, by his own sword. And the worst thing is that his death did not cause any pity. For the warriors and subjects, it was a relief. People sighed, the horror was over. The son of the great Cyrus passed away not as the heir to greatness, but as a tyrant destroyed by his own weapon. But even his death did not bring peace. It only opened the door to even greater chaos. It would seem that with the death of Cambyses, silence should have ensued. But his own crimes came back to haunt the empire like a boomerang. He killed his brother Smerdis to retain power. And that was the cause of the chaos. Because when the king died, one of the magicians, a priest-sorcerer, declared himself the true Smerdis. And the people believed him. Why? Because the truth about his brother's death was hidden. And the silence of the court played into the hands of the impostor. The people trusted the stranger more than the official announcements of the Achaemenid dynasty. Thus began the revolt of the Magi. The empire was on the verge of schism. Some celebrated the return of Cyrus' brother, while others saw it as a vile deception. But trust in the dynasty was irrevocably undermined. Can an empire survive if the people believe a pretender more than their king? Cyrus the Great created a state that was admired throughout the ancient world. His son left behind a country riddled with fear and hatred, where impostors were believed more than the legitimate heirs. Cambyses did not just ruin his own life. He threatened the very existence of the empire he was supposed to protect. Cambyses too began his reign as the son of the great Cyrus. But instead of his father's wisdom, he inherited only the crown. He killed his own brother and wife, violating the laws of his family and ancestors. He forced a nobleman to kill his own son and turned the court into a torture chamber. He slaughtered a sacred bull and opened the tombs of the pharaohs, showing contempt for the gods. He led his army into the desert and sent thousands to their deaths. He died by his own sword and became a laughingstock of history. His legacy is not victories or laws. His legacy is fear, shame, and chaos. His death was not a tragedy. It was a relief. For Persia's most terrible enemy sat not beyond its borders, but on its throne.